Thank you again, all of you, for coming tonight. Thank you for all of you who are watching this recording. It's good to have you here. It's good to honor and celebrate Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who is just such a almost indescribable presence in terms of social justice and civil rights in our country. So let us begin with a prayer, and this is a prayer from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Oh God, we thank you for the lives of great saints and prophets in the past, who have revealed to us that we can stand up amid the problems and difficulties and trials of life and not give in. We thank you for our foreparents who've given us something in the midst of the darkness of exploitation and oppression to keep going. Grant that we will go on with the proper faith and the proper determination of will, so that we will be able to make a creative contribution to this world. In the name and spirit of Jesus, we pray. Amen. So thank you very much. There were several people who were involved in putting all of this together. And I especially want to thank Mary Lou Abbott, who graciously offered this special presentation to our group and our parish and our visitors. So thank you very much, Mary Lou. Martin Luther King believed in the transformative power of love and the importance of doing what is right. He committed his life to and took nonviolent action for social change, for peace and freedom, for opportunity and equality, for racial, economic, and social justice, and human rights for all. He found ways to face a dark and difficult reality and to remain optimistic. He based it all on prayer and his faith in God. He was assassinated in 1968 at the age of 39. He remains an inspiration to us all in our work for, and I quote, liberty and justice for all. So we are going to start tonight with a video, which is a clip from the I Have a Dream speech, because if we don't start with that, the TV gets unhappy and then we have trouble. So
I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when it happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
So tonight, Mary Lou will help us learn more and reflect on Martin Luther King. I invite you as you listen to be attuned to the presence of gospel values in his philosophies, words, and actions, and to the ways they can inspire us as we face the challenges of today's world. Mary Lou is a member of St. Mary Catholic Community. I have come to know her, as many have, as a humble woman and have been touched by her deep, abiding faith. Please help me welcome Mary Lou Abbott.
Well, I want to share. Sharing is good. I mean, we've all been told sharing is good. And every January in the last few years, it seems like I feel a nudge that I should share. But I don't get around to offering to share. But this year was different. And so I actually saw Don going out the door one day and said, I have something I think I would like to share. And so tonight I'm here to share with you. I want you to know that my reflections are based on my memory. And as hopefully, as some of you know, it was a few years back. So you will forgive my memory if it's not quite true. And you might wonder why I'm going to use the word Negro as opposed to some other words. And the reason is because Dr. King used the words Negro. And my experience with him and seeing him, hearing him talk, I thought it would be appropriate to use that word. Now, for some of you who remember the 50s, and if you don't remember it, you've read about it, it was quite a time. Some people called it, well, post-World War II times, but other people remember it as being the quiet before other things happened. It was kind of the pre-Woodstock period and the pre-hippie period. And it was the period where, well, I've heard about those beatniks, but no one I knew ever actually met one. So it was also pre-Vietnam War. So it was before some of the discussions and some of the actions that occurred. It was almost, I'm not going to say quiet, but it was a space, a different time. I had an experience that kind of precipitated my whole feeling and participation with Dr. King. And I grew up mainly in Ohio, a nice middle-class white existence, comfortable. For 1 year, my parents were asked to move to Georgia, just for 1 year. And so I had an interesting experience, which I have only shared with one person, and that was Sandy. So you will be among the first. When I was 13, and that's when we moved, I wanted to meet new kids and be a part of the group. And so I joined a basketball team at my school. I wasn't very good, but I joined it. And the only thing was, if you played a school in Georgia, in Atlanta, you had to get your own transportation. Well, my parents weren't available on a Saturday when it was time for me to play. And I wanted to play because that's how I got to meet people. So my choices were limited, and the choices were the city bus. I had been on the city buses before, and they were interesting at that time. They looked like any other bus until you got on. And then all of a sudden you saw these movable hanging signs from the top of the bus. And one of the signs said white and one colored, and they could be moved depending on who was sitting where. And of course, if you were white, you sat in the front. If you were black, you had the indignity of going up front to pay your money, but then you couldn't go down the aisle. You had to get off the bus and go around to the back door. So you entered the back door. And of course, you know that if all the seats for the designated white rows were taken, then if you were a Negro and you were sitting in the back, a white person could simply come towards you. And because it was segregation, you had to get up and give your seat. Okay, I'm 13. I haven't had a lot of experience on buses. So I decided, well, oh, here goes, I want to go to that basketball game. So I paid my money, started looking for a place to sit. All the white seats were taken. The only seat that I could see was a row right behind the last white seat. And there was a black man sitting in that seat, but there's room for two. I remember thinking, I am not going to ask that man to get up. I was 13, but I had an idea of what was right and what was wrong. And so I proceeded to sit down. And inside me was, I think I did a right thing. But what I didn't know was that the man was absolutely terrified and got up and said, and I'll always remember these words, "Don't make trouble." And got up and then went to the back of the bus. I found out much later that the bus drivers had been deputized as police officers and they all carried revolvers. So they had the right to forcibly enforce the segregation rules and could arrest a Negro that chose not to participate in integration. My one takeaway from that experience was, I was so disappointed in myself. I had wanted to do something right and something good, and it didn't work out. It didn't work out. So that made inside of me at least a receptive to what it must feel like for the people that had to get up. Here I was a 13-year-old and I had an adult get up so I could have the whole seat. Well, 10 years later, let's leave, that was 1950. Let's leave 1950. And let's go to 1959. Okay. My parents came back, lived in Ohio. I went to The Ohio State University. I graduated. I had my first job. I was proud with my life. My life was going on. I had heard from a friend of a friend who worked in religious education in a Columbus church that there was a wonderful conference coming up near me, near us, and that there was a pastor from Georgia who was called Martin Luther King. And he was going to be one of the speakers. Now, he was more excited than I was, but because I wasn't familiar with what was going on, I did know that the school, Ohio University, it's a state school, it was about an hour's drive from Columbus. It was smaller than Ohio State University. It was the home from a period between, well, it was Christmas break, between the 27th of December and January 2nd, that was 59 to 60, of 3,600 students who were coming from 100 countries as a part of the 18th Ecumenical Student Conference. I didn't know what that was or been involved with that, but the idea that 3,600 students were coming to Ohio University. The thing about it was there would be different speakers on different days, and there were speakers, because it was an ecumenical experience, there were speakers from India, there were speakers from Nigeria, and then there was to be a speaker, Dr. Martin Luther King. The person that asked me if I would be interested in attending, not the whole conference, but Dr. King had asked that on the day he was going to be there, he wasn't there all those days, he was going to be there for just Wednesday, December 30th, 1959. But he asked that in the evening, that if there were, well, he invited religious pastors from any church in the area, youth workers, volunteers. He specifically came to that conference with one mission, which was to try to explain the relationship between civil rights movement and Christianity and the Christian faith. Now, he had been a busy person, obviously. He had lived in Montgomery, Alabama. He had been instrumental in the Montgomery, Alabama boycott in terms of the bus situation down there. It was really remarkable that he would come and give that day to speak to this group. Now, I did agree to go. I had no idea what to expect from his speech. I had no idea what he looked like. I had no idea about some of the experiences he had already had in his life. I mean, I did know that he had earned a doctorate from Boston University in theology. I did know that he had been instrumental in working in, he was a pastor in Montgomery, Alabama, that he was involved in that whole boycott. I did find out through the process that he had that wonderful interest in non-violence. And so you'll notice that the remaining things I'm going to say, you're going to hear non-violence a great deal. He was very, very, very convinced that non-violence was a way that needed to be an approach to be used. Okay, so let's go to December 30th. Now, I was able to find out through student newspapers and through Athens, Ohio newspapers, what happened that day that I wasn't invited to, the student part. And so I thought I might share with you what it was like for him to come that day, to give that whole day to that student group. He arrived at 2:30 in the morning, greeted by photographers. Okay. I guess he had a little time to sleep. He had 2 early student sessions. He then had another hour of interviews from the press. There must be a lot of wonderful press interviews out there that haven't surfaced. I actually looked for some to see if I could find some of these interviews since he was covered so much, but they're kind of rare to find. They did have lunch. Apparently they talked about national and international politics at this lunch. There was a book signing after that, Meet the Author. And when I read about that, I went, well, book signing. I didn't remember that he had written books. There were 2 books of his sermons. And so my instant thought was, I wonder how many students bought books on sermons. But there was book signing, and so students had the opportunity, if they chose, to buy these books. The big afternoon, though, was when he was going to speak to students on the topic of racial tension. That was the name of that session. And unlike some of the morning sessions, and I didn't find out what the morning sessions were about, but 700 people came. I mean, not people, students. There were only 3,600 registered. 700 of them came for that session, and I'm sure there were concurrent sessions. There were so many people in the auditorium, they were lined up against the wall. It was supposed to last for an hour, and it was more of a question and answer about racial tensions. It went on and on and on, and the people that were supposed to come next, their sessions, they said, please take our time, because there was so much interest. Now, I thought it would be interesting to find out what the students were asking before I came to my part. And I was able to find out what some of the questions and what his answers were. And so if you wonder why I have paper, it's because I wanted to make sure that I read his words as accurately as I could find from these reports. One of the first questions was, how could a segregated, persecuted people avoid hatred? Now, these were students. The answer was one word: forgiveness. That's all they said. Another question, and I like this because I can just see students wanting to ask this question. Can you tell us about your stabbing attack in 1958? And he said, I bear no hatred or ill will against my unfortunate, misguided assailant. He had been on another book signing experience in Harlem, and a lady who was deemed mentally ill attacked him. He had really serious injuries, but he survived. And so that was the basis. Just as a side thing, we know he was assassinated. I'm glad that he did not see that his mother was also assassinated. Now, another question. Why did you move from Montgomery, Alabama to Atlanta, Georgia? So I figured, well, that must be students who lived in Montgomery and wanted to know why I left. I don't know. Here's what he said. In Atlanta, I have time to organize and train my people to use nonviolence in struggle for social justice. He encouraged students to work together. This is reminiscent of the video. He encouraged them to work together, pray together, struggle together, go to jail together, stand up for freedom, together for a truly free nation. Another question was related to Mahatma Gandhi. Now, this was an international conference, and there were some speakers and maybe some students from India. And so the question was about Gandhi's method. Interesting, the students didn't say nonviolence, his method. And Dr. King had spent February and March of that same year, 1959. He had been invited to India. He stayed at the actual house, one of the houses that Mahatma Gandhi lived in. He was able to visit with Prime Minister Nehru and spent time talking to Gandhi's disciples about their experience of nonviolence. And so he was able to share that with the students. And then the last question that I have written down that the students asked, and of course this went on for hours, so there were many more questions. But the question was, what is the effect of international influence of the US because of the racial situation? And because I think this was an international group of people, that was a concern to some of the students. He said the US will lose prestige in the world if the problem is not solved in a few years. He had connected the American struggle with a worldwide Christian mission for justice. Christian mission for justice. And then this was the phrase I read, and I thought, I would like to see this one on a monument. The state of the world today doesn't allow us the luxury of an anemic democracy. I thought, wow, that's pretty potent. Okay, then that was a brief look at the students section. It was supposed to be dinner time, and he was so tired by that time that he asked to be excused and he took a nap. And all that leads up then to the time when I'm asking you to be patient, I'm finally getting there, to the time that I and my friend arrived at the place to hear him talk. If you've been to Ohio University, you know that one of the places, they call it a chapel. But I was totally confused when I was told I was gonna go to the chapel. I was expecting a chapel. And what I found was a nice room with pews painted white, and I have a memory of a burgundy rug, and all there was an organ. And of course, it was a state school when you think about it, and so it couldn't have a religious affiliation, and it was used for weddings and other things. But when I walked into that chapel, I thought, this is a perfect place for him to be. Pews, an organ. Okay, time for this meeting. Now, this chapel could hold 150 people. So I was prepared for the crowd that was going to be coming. I mean, he had asked religious leaders, Christians, from pastors, religious education, volunteers. I expected this huge crowd of people, and there were 50 of us. And I had no idea what that meant, but I certainly didn't have a trouble finding a good seat. And I found a seat up front, and these are my impressions. I expected him to be taller. He was 5'7". He had an imposing presence, as you saw. The thing that impressed me is how friendly he was to the 50 people of us that were there. He had that smile. He then had that voice, that voice that you just heard, that part of you feels like, is this a preacher? Am I gonna get a sermon now? Or is it just that it seems to roll and resonate with you? So here I am in the seat with the 50 people. And what he wanted and why he had asked for as many people in the area to come was because he was so concerned about the connection, the importance of connecting what Christianity is all about and believes in, and what he was doing, not separating, and hoping that people who were involved in the church could see the relationship of what he was doing and its importance and its in value. He had 4 themes that evening. I remember 4 themes. He didn't talk long. I wish that I had had the maturity to see the depth of his concern. I'm hearing a speaker tonight, a famous speaker. I didn't at that point in my life see the significance, especially the significance to me. I couldn't see that. I didn't see that relationship to myself. But point 1, first point, was the urgency. Christians must act against injustice. Well, I didn't know of anybody I'd been unjust to. He warned against complacency and delay in the struggle for civil rights. These are all things we understand. You could almost say that now. I didn't appreciate it because I had never been discriminated against. I'd only had my one little experience at the age of 13. And so I felt that I missed something that I should have had. Second big point, and this is one of the bigger points. This one I could understand. The church's moral dilemma. He challenged us to fully embrace civil rights. The church to embrace civil rights. He said faith demands confronting segregation and discrimination in all areas of life. I could sense that a little bit because in my little 13-year-old life, I had tried something, failed, but I tried. In 1963, when he went to Birmingham, Alabama, and every January, I haven't finished, but I want to tell you, every January, I read his letter from the Birmingham jail. And the reason why I read it every January is because it's in response to 8 religious leaders. I say this, 8 religious leaders, one of whom was a Catholic bishop, who wrote a letter that was published in the paper called Call for Unity, in which they were saying to him and to his movement, the time isn't right. Let the courts work through this. Don't cause undue stress. And then, I'm going to tell, I don't know their names, but they represented a Jewish rabbi, 2 Methodist preachers, 2 Episcopalians, a Catholic bishop, and a Baptist minister. So it was a group. It wasn't just one denomination who had sent this letter to be published. So if you ever want on a January to read his response, he responded to each and every point in a wonderful way. So that night, his second challenge, that the church must embrace civil rights, must confront segregation. I could see and feel that a little bit more. And of course, every time I read that letter, I feel it more. The third point that night was about the global dimension. He linked racial tension and struggle for equality to the broader Christian mission of the world. I don't know that we talk a lot about Christian mission in the world. But he felt, and maybe it was because it was a conference, an international conference, but he felt that we as Christians need to, this is a part of what being a Christian's about, not just here, but all over. And then the fourth one I could relate to, and everyone here could relate to, and I think about this fourth one a great deal. Faith in action. The gospel wasn't just spiritual, but actively sought justice. And he particularly quoted various of his sermons. As I read these four, I guess I would ask you to say to yourself, as a Christian, how do I make these four statements real in 2026? How can I take these statements and ideals in my mind and make them real? And in finishing, I have a story to finish, but in finishing, thank heavens here at St. Mary Catholic Community in our bulletin, if you've looked at our bulletin, there's always 3 inches of Catholic social teaching. It's a little box, and if you read it, great. But the one I like, being the very first one of our little box, was each person is sacred, made in God's image, equal in dignity. And thank heavens we have that. Now my last and final little story. I asked you to think about, what some of the things I've mentioned might mean in terms of 2026 and in your life. Well, in 2025, I had another little experience. And like many of you, hopefully, I voted on November. And I had a paper ballot like most of you, the mail-in ballots like most of you did. And I did my civic duty and I mailed it in early. And I was proud of myself. And about 3 days later, I got a phone call that said, I'm sorry, but we can't verify that the information that you wrote on the little place where you're supposed to write your name and your birth date, we can't verify that that is accurate as compared to what you wrote when you registered to vote. Okay, for a few seconds I thought, why bother? I mean, this is just one of those local elections. There'll be other people that will probably vote the same way I was going to vote, and it just means more difficulty, and I could just sit back. And then this little voice said, no. I remember hearing him that night tell one of the people who came up to him afterwards that the goal was to register 1 million black voters. This was in the 50s. 1 million. And I got to thinking, and here I am, even thinking about not going through the whatever I have to do. And so I decided that whatever, so it took phone calls and pieces of paper, but my last statement of these people was, will my vote count? And the answer was yes. So I thank you for my story of my bus experience, my story of Martin Luther King Jr.'s experience, and most of all, how I hope we don't take for granted all the things that he was trying so hard that day that this is a Christian responsibility, a Christian role that we have. He worked all that day answering those questions. And so I hope to leave you with that idea. It's ours. And what we do with it, that's ours too. Thank you.
All right. Okay, questions, comments? Anyone?
Thanks for sharing.
Well, I finally shared my January experience. Thank you.
Very awesome. You know, I grew up in a very, very small town in southwest Michigan that was predominantly black. And I thought it was kind of normal. However, this was in the 50s, the blacks lived in a totally different area of town. But I didn't see any violent or criminal or cruel, nothing like that happened until I went south. And that's where the signs popped up, whites only, coloreds here, whites here. But, and then over time, it started to get worse, and we had really severe riots, 63, 67. And anyway, that's
One
my little
experience
story.
that I had here in Helena, and this happened in the 80s. I had always been intrigued by what had Martin Luther King learned from Gandhi's followers about nonviolence? Who is the most knowledgeable? Who are the most knowledgeable people about techniques of nonviolence? How do you teach people when someone comes up to you and spits in your face? What do you do? When someone calls you and your relatives' names, what do you do? When someone comes up to you and pulls on your hair, how do you do that? Who has that information? Who has those techniques? Who has those techniques? Well, in the 80s, I thought, well, in Helena, who might have those techniques? I'd like to go to a class. I really want to go to a class. And not that I expect to be in that situation, but I was teaching at the time. And I thought this would be information that my students might find helpful in a situation, employer-employee. The only people I thought to contact were the people in the labor unions. And so I called the only number I could find in the labor union in the phone book, and I asked about classes, and they said, oh yes, we do have classes, and can you tell me what union you're with? I wasn't with any union. And the answer was, I'm sorry, this information is to be used for union members to work with. So I never found any place in Helena. And maybe there isn't. I don't know, but there should be. You know, where do we teach these things? I never did find it.
Should be upstairs.
Yeah.
So if I may, I'm not a member of the community here. My name is Pat Sullivan. I taught at Southern Arkansas University before returning to Helena. And I ran the Masters of Public Administration program with a focus on social justice. It just so happens that I studied under Louis Vitale at the Franciscan School of Theology. And if you want to know who that is, he is Father Nonviolence. He is his class. I took his classes there in Berkeley on nonviolence. I happen to have and you're welcome to share it. They have the video that they shared in the class of the history of all these nonviolent movements and how they worked and their techniques. There's a wonderful section in this about the Montgomery boycott and the lunch counter issues and everything, and it shows them preparing to do the marches and giving the instructions and so forth. Coincidentally, years later, I was at a call to action conference, and one of the presenters was the same person that taught those people for the marches. And it was an honor, and he and I sat down and spoke for a while, but I actually taught students in Southern Arkansas nonviolent action and the social justice stuff. People couldn't figure out why I didn't have a burning cross in my yard, because I was very open about it. I recommend also Walter Wink's work. He is very good in tying scripture to nonviolence, and explains it in such a way that many of us have not heard before. It's not been emphasized. If I could just presume to give you a really good example, he talks about the teaching on turning the other cheek, which he says is largely misunderstood, because people think that makes me a doormat, I've got to be walked over and so forth. He says, no, that's not at all. That the part of the custom, part of the culture at the time was that if somebody struck you across the face, that was only a person that was higher class could do that. But if you turned to give them the other cheek, the only way that they could hit you again is either to backhand you, which made you their equal, or use the left hand, which was forbidden. Okay, and so what the teaching is to claim your power, to claim your voice. The same thing with if you are given a pack from the Roman soldiers to carry for a mile, carry it for 2. Because the Roman soldiers were under strict commands to not have anybody carry their packs any more than a mile. And so if you continue carrying it, you put that legionnaire in a lot of trouble. It's claiming your voice, because he would actually actively have to take it away from you to keep you from going that extra mile. So when I read that first, when I read his work at first, I said, well, that's amazing. How come we don't hear that? Because that makes a lot more sense than saying, I'm going to become a doormat. Right? It's claiming your voice. And so, the other plenty that teach nonviolence, and I recommend any of Louis Vitale's books on nonviolence and nonviolent action. Obviously, I am Franciscan. And so, anyway, that's what I learned. And in response to your question, who's teaching nonviolence, that's who's teaching it.
Another resource I would recommend is Father John Deere. Sorry, it's Jesuit, but
The Jesuits too.
yeah, but he has a weekly podcast called the Nonviolence Podcast, and he's got a foundation, the Beatitude Center for Nonviolence. He's read everything by Gandhi. Gandhi once made the comment that Jesus is the greatest nonviolent person in history. The only people who don't realize that are Christians. They have a Father John Deere, D-E-A-R. He's got some great books as well.
Thank you.
I have a question. And another resource is Richard Rohr, which many of us have read. When you went to this conference and saw Dr. King, did it change your attitude or behavior? And are there some applications for us here in Montana today?
It took me a while to integrate what he said into my limited experience. I had no experience with being discriminated against. I had no experience to use what he said. So it took years. But as the years went by, as I was able to see more and hear more, when you're 20, you don't reach out to the extent that you are aware of what's going on around you. As I matured and I saw what was happening, yes, it was like almost having to rediscover, reread, and thank heavens we have those sermons available to us. And as I said, reading that letter from the Birmingham jail, I mean, they mean so much more to me and help me now. Now, I guess I have become, I have a tendency, like many people, that when I feel affronted or something I see is wrong, I get very angry. It's the part that I see is the need for how to manage anger. And as I get older, I see the value of nonviolence. I see the value of having people learn the techniques of nonviolence, of being able to say, yes, I feel anger, and the anger is good, it's right, but how do I express it?
Do you have any thoughts about your own question?
No, I've just gotten more involved with resisting some of the injustice that we have. I'm from our Redeemer's Lutheran Church, and we started a faith in action at our church, which is about 20 or 30 of us, and we get together and trying to process what's happening in our culture, and then looking for ways where we can advocate. So we've gone to our federal legislators, our Congress and senators' offices, to express another Christian point of view that they might not hear. We attended some of the rallies and protests. We've written to our various legislators and to speak out, and we're looking to find other ways that we can join the communities to work, because there is violence and racism, there is mistreatment and oppression of immigrants, and we want to do something at least to express ourselves and make a difference. And Nelson Bach is our leader, and so we've been meeting since November? Last summer. Okay. So I asked the question just because it seems like my perception and role has changed since seeing some of the injustice. Now, I have a daughter that lives in Minneapolis now, and she's seen firsthand some of the violence and some of the chaos and some of the destruction that's happening. And so obviously I'm concerned for her and our granddaughters too. But I think this is a time that we need to speak up, especially for those who do not have the opportunities and privilege to do that.
No, I appreciate what you're saying, and I hope we can continue to build an interfaith group around faith and justice. It's really cool what you guys are doing, so.
So when you go to the legislators' offices or you contact them, what do you get back? I mean, we've done some of that, and you get a form letter.
Yeah.
You just have to keep doing this.
Keep
But
trying.
they have to record everything, right, Nelson? Maybe you can
Well,
address that.
we never speak to the legislators, we always speak to their staff. And we find that their staff people, mostly quite young, are, very attentive, very, respectful and listen, and we feel that as much as anything else, that maybe doing that might have, and we talk about our Christian faith, and that just maybe that might have an impact on some of these young people who are working for Congress people, and that maybe after listening to us, they'll, and then they hear other things, maybe it'll cause them to ask questions in their own minds about, what's true and right and good. The other thing is that we feel that there has to be accountability of our elected officials to the people. Now they try as hard as they can to ignore us or to fool us, but you have, part of my faith anyway is that they can't get away with that forever, and then there will be an accounting at some point. There will be accountability, and when that time comes, we need to be able to say, hey, we spoke to you, as strongly as we could for this long and this many times, and now there has to be accountability on your part. So hopefully, but not just in terms of naive optimism, but in terms of our faith, there will come a time when that accountability comes to pass, and then we will really be challenged about what to do with folks who have been so faithless and so unfaithful to our Constitution and the principles of our government. And in places like South Africa, they had these truth and reconciliation commissions, and part of that was willingness to forgive those who had perpetrated the kinds of acts that we're all trying to resist and are so upset by now, and faith that acting in that which that we will all learn some things that we need to learn, in order, because retribution and revenge, I mean, it's such a powerful temptation, but we dare not fall prey to that temptation. Otherwise, we just perpetuate, the cycles. And I think you talk about the training. That's part of that. It's part of that, building a community of people who embrace those principles and those tactics. I mean, those tactics aren't something that come naturally. Those folks who were involved in the civil rights movement, they went through rigorous training for weeks and months before they took any action, because they knew what might possibly happen, and they had to be able to withstand that and keep faith with their beliefs and their commitments.
There's another point too. We're doing a book study called, the author is Drew Strait, and he writes Strange Worship. And he talks about Christian nationalism, saying that we need to say that this is political and spiritual idolatry. But in doing so, he said nonviolence in his book is far more effective in changing lives and a country politics than violence. Violence it perpetuates dictatorships and control and more violence, where nonviolence is very successful in changing. So the focus we try and emphasize is the love of Christ. And that's the basis we work out of. And it's hard to love people you're angry with.
And people who are hurting us in
Yes,
various ways,
right,
and
others.
threatening us, yeah.
Thank you for letting us come.
Oh, thank you for coming. Gratitude is ours. Any other comments, questions, anything else? Okay.
Well, I'm sure we all feel very privileged that we were able to be here tonight to have you tell your story to us. And I hope that it's a comfort to you to know that it will not be lost now.
Be forgotten.
That's a wonderful thought, thank you.